Hello, it's Keith here and welcome to the Simple series. Today we're going to look at a simple bitmap example on the Apple II. The Apple II makes screen drawing a little bit tricky, but it's not too bad, and we'll go over the details of it, so hopefully we'll be able to make it as easy as possible for you. Well, let's go over to the example and have a look at it in action. So here's the code today. We're going to have two examples. We'll just fire up the first one here on the Apple II and we'll see it running. And so this is the first example. Now, it's a bit blurry, but that is essentially a smiley face. You'll maybe have to take my word for it because of the graphical blurring. So that's the simple example, but we do have a more adventurous example here. If I just fire this up, you can see we have our Chibico character here. So we do have two examples here that we can use. Now, in addition to the regular two-color version here, we can try and use the Apple II's color effect if we just enable that alternate version here and run that. And this is where we essentially use the NTSC color kind of effect to simulate some colors. And you can see maybe a bit that this foot here is in green, and then the clothing here is in blue, and the necklace is in yellow, and the hair's in pink. It's not great, but as I say, I did have a little bit of a go at least to try and use those colors. So let's just have a look at the source code today. So this is going to be first the smiley example, the very simple one, and this is a 7x8 tile. Now in most systems I do an 8x8 tile, but a single byte on the Apple II is actually only 7 pixels. There's one bit used that is used to define the color palette, if you can call it a color palette, but that's the terminology I'm going to be using. Now, first of all, I'm defining some 0-page entries here. I tend to use the 0-page a bit like Z80 registers, so you can see I'm defining HL for source, DE for destination, and BC as a byte count, or just B actually in this case. It doesn't look like I needed C in this example. So that's what I'm going to be using for temporary storage. What we need to do first is we need to get our screen turned into graphics mode and get everything set up, and that's what these commands are doing here. Now on the Apple II, rather strangely, rather than writing a particular value to certain addresses, this mere act of reading from an address will actually affect the command that we want. So you can see I'm reading here from C050 to clear the text screen, and then we are just using C052 to enable the full screen, C057 for high resolution graphics, and C055 to select page 2. So that will select the graphics screen for us. Now next, of course, we need a bitmap, and here it is. Now this bitmap is a smiley here. You can kind of see it here. Here's the mouth with these zeros here. There's an eye here and there's an eye here. And then this top bit is 0. Now the Apple II's color screen effectively always has black and white, and then the extra colors are blue and orange, or pink and cyan, I think it is. It's a bit of a strange palette, but that's what we have. And that top bit will define what color palette is used. That's why I've marked it as C here. So that's why we only have 7 pixels per byte. A bit strange, but that's the way it works. It's not just the pixel screen layout that's a bit tricky though on the Apple. The screen memory, consecutive lines on the visible screen are not consecutive lines in memory. It's quite common for the lines to be sort of interlaced where 8 lines are consecutive, but on the Apple II this is sort of taken to a whole new level, unfortunately. And the way it works is essentially that the lines are split into lots of different places, and so effectively if we've got a Y line number, then we have to split that Y number into 3 separate parts here. The top 2 bits will define a third of the screen, and these are in different memory addresses, and then beyond that these 3 bits here and these 3 bits here also have to be treated differently, because this part actually takes precedence over this part. And as I say, this is a bit odd, but it does happen from time to time. So what we've essentially got here is a lot of mathematical calculations here, stripping out the B part and then effectively multiplying it by hexadecimal 80 here, just by logical shifts here. And then what we're also doing here is we're having to add the screen base, because the screen base starts at hexadecimal 4000. We're then looking at the top 2 bits here, and we're branching out to 3 separate parts here, and then we are actually adding the offset for that section of the screen. And finally, we're multiplying this part by 400, but because we're only doing the top byte, we just need to effectively multiply it by 4. Now, all of this is a real pain, and what I'd sort of suggest is if you're just trying to get things onto the screen, hopefully this example will work fine for you. If if you need to write your own routines, then you're going to have a play and look at some of the documentation in the Apple manuals to get your head around the screen, because it is a real pain, and it did take me a lot of time to get this formula working. Hopefully it is working now, but once we've got it, hopefully we can just use it as is, and it shouldn't be too hard for us to do things. Now, when it comes to actually getting the graphics to the screen, fortunately, once we've got that routine, if we're only working in an 8x8 block, it's not going to be too bad for us. So what we're doing here is we've got this loop here, we've got this X counter here, and that's the line count, and then we've got Y, which we're just using to allow for an indirect read from the address in ZHL. So we're reading a byte from the address in ZHL, which will be our smiley, and we're writing it to the screen, which will be DE here. Once we've written a single byte, because our image is only 1 byte wide, we need to move down a line, and to do that we add hexadecimal 400 to the DE address. Of course, we only need to affect the D part of that, so that's what we're doing here. We're adding 4 to the 0-page D entry here, and then we're just repeating. We use incrementing the Y counter, which will of course increment the source memory address as well. And once we've done all 8 lines, we finish, but we just repeat until we have. So that's the principle for the basic example. We've got this more complex example here though. This is the Chibico character, and we've got these sprites here. Well, where can we get a sprite? Well, my AcroSprite editor will export one for you. So this is AcroSprite editor, it's free and open source. If we go to 6502 and Apple II, we've got 2 and 4 color options here, and it does have a very basic 4 color Apple palette mode. If you see here, this is the image that we exported before. I think this is the wrong version of the file. This is the uncolored version, but if we go to ZX Paint and if we go to colors, we can then paint in colors here, as you see. If I now just select 0 here, we can color things in. So it does give the basic ability to color things in and then export a file in the correct format. As I say, it's free and open source. It's included in the sources 7-zip if you go to my website. So that's how we can get a bitmap for today's example. This part fortunately hasn't changed, because I really don't want to discuss that again. It's quite complex, unfortunately. This part hasn't changed. It's only this part that's different, because the sprite is wider and taller. So let's have a look at what's going on this time. Okay, so we're starting off with X and Y as the position of the start of the sprite, and we're defining a bitmap width here as 8 because of that missing bit. Usually it would only be 6 wide, but this time it's got a little bit wider. So we're actually 8 bytes wide this time. We're then loading the accumulator with the height in strips, and each strip is 8 lines, and that's because of that weird splitting of the memory addresses. It's easiest to work in 8 line tall chunks here, so that's what we're doing. So here we're just setting that up. We're then pushing the accumulator onto the register and also the X part onto the register, because we're needing to get everything back for later because of the way the loops are working. We're also pushing Y on because we need to get Y back. We're going to need to do multiple calculations of the screen position to cope with that complex mathematics of calculating the screen. Now, within an 8x8 strip, we can just use our previous add hexadecimal 400 to the destination to calculate the next vertical line down. But as I say, once we get beyond that, it's going to get too complicated. So we're just going to use another get screen pos to recalculate. Now, within a line, it's going to be very straightforward. We're going to use the Y counter to move across the destination and source data and just write bitmap data accordingly. So we'll just keep doing that until we've got to the width of the image, which is 8 in this case. We're just repeating up here each time, increasing Y, which of course will move along the source and destination data. Now, once we've done a line, we need to reset Y next time. So we're adding Y to the HL, which is the source data address. And then what we're doing is we're moving down by adding hexadecimal 400 or hexadecimal 4, because we only need to set the top byte to D here. And that will move us down a line, but only within an 8x8 boundary. So what we're doing next is we're decreasing X, which is set to 8 because we can only do 8 lines before we recalculate. And we're repeating until X reaches 0, but then when it does reach 0, you'll see we're restoring here the Y register, adding 8 to it, and then we are transferring A to Y, and we're repeating all the way up here, provided we've not done all of the strips, because if you remember, we counted the number of strips in the accumulator here, and that will effectively recalculate using get screen pos until we've finished the image. A bit of a pain, but that's the best way I could figure out to do it. So that's how we're getting that Chibico character to the screen. Let's see that here, just once again. So there it is on all its kind of confused colour glory. It's not great, as I say. If you want to see a better example, probably better to see Grime 6502, the programming example I did some time ago, about a year ago now. I made a game in 7 days, and that did have some quite nice colour on the Apple II. I was pleasantly surprised by how it came out. So there we go. So we've had a look at the Apple II, and we've seen an example of getting a simple bitmap onto the screen, a very small one, and then a much larger one. Now, we are going to do another example on the Apple II in this simple series. We're going to learn how to get that smiley and actually move it around the screen via the joystick. So please follow along if you want to see that, because I think that will be another thing that will help you get started. If you've got an idea for a simple game you want to make, but you just want a little leg up to get things started as quickly as possible. Now, as always, you can download the source code to today's example and the development tools, the script build scripts and things from my website, so please go along and check that out. I've got lots of other tutorials on the YouTube channel, so if you've just come across this but you'd like to maybe see something else, I've got Nintendo systems, I've got Z80, 68000, I'm even doing 8086 now, so I've got lots of other CPUs and also hardware platforms I'm covering, so have a look around, see if anything interests you, and like and subscribe, you know, that kind of thing. But anyway, whatever you do, I hope you'll enjoy programming the Apple II and programming the 6502. Thanks for watching today, and goodbye.